Hello and welcome. I'm John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety.
And I'm Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, the grassroots arm of Everytown.
Today, we're welcoming Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham for the fifth installment of Demanding Women, Quarantine Conversations about Gun Violence. Governor, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a thrill to have you.
John, I'm delighted. Thank you very much for including me, and thank you for the work that you're doing to keep Americans and families safe in every community. So thank you very much.
Thanks for those kind words. You're such a great partner. Now, as you know, we've been talking with some of the most powerful women leaders about a timely issue, how to address one of our oldest public health emergencies, gun violence, in the middle of a new one, the coronavirus. But before we start, I'd like to just zoom out for 1 minute. You know, when I started working on gun safety, it was something you only talked about in states like California, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. But Governor, thanks to leaders like you, that's just no longer the case. As New Mexico's former Secretary of Health, you understand gun violence for what it is, a public health crisis. So under your leadership, New Mexico has passed a series of gun laws, and now you're bringing that same public health know-how to COVID-19. We're really anxious to hear more about your approach to both these issues. So now Shannon's going to take it from here, and I'm actually going to watch the rest of it on Twitter. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Governor, it is such a pleasure to talk to you today. I know our volunteers appreciate your leadership in New Mexico. I know they're thrilled to watch today, especially given all that you have accomplished as governor.
Well, that is very kind of you. Look, it really is a partnership, and there is absolutely no way that we would have our gun violence laws, right, and gun safety laws passed through two different legislative sessions, nor would we be in a position, although I'd like to tell you that we're doing everything I think we could be doing about studying gun violence as the public health emergency and epidemic that it is. I think all states that are looking at that dynamic are a little bit stretched thin with COVID. But it's something we really can't lose sight of. There's no way that happens without the grassroots productive effort and education, both of Everytown and Moms Demand Action. And as you know, these individuals and partners in New Mexico, frankly, won the day. And without them, we can't be successful frankly, we all have a constitutional right to be safe in our homes and communities. And I'm very grateful for your leadership and advocacy. We're going to need more of it. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being such an amazing partner. Let's just dive right in. Here's my first question for you. You know, we just talked about how you've been such a leader. You've been following public opinion and common sense when it comes to prioritizing the issue of gun safety. You've signed 3 good gun bills into law, including a background checks law. So what is your advice to governors, especially in Western states, when it comes to passing gun safety laws and standing up to special interests?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first, the easy part. Make sure that you are working with credible advocates who are not only clear about reducing gun violence, right, in our communities and states, but can also really help navigate, because it is, if you're going up, and we are, against the NRA, then it means that incredible resources and a false, right, effort at not providing facts and using social media in a way to do that, which is disappointing to me as an advocate and a politician and an elected leader. But we know that that exists. And scare tactics, that we are taking everybody's guns away, that we are creating a registry to somehow punish you, and that we don't believe, and whether you're a constitutional scholar or not about the Second Amendment, that this is a hidden agenda, not to deal with gun violence, but just to reduce and restrict people's individual rights. And that's not true. And in fact, you've done an incredible job getting other advocates like sportsmen and women, really making sure that these are common sense, very reasonable efforts to just curb gun violence, which in a country that has the worst set of gun violence statistics per capita in the entire world, then this is something we've got to get addressed. So my first advice is don't shy away from having strong partners. 2, do that groundwork. So Moms Demand Action in every town. You were on the ground in New Mexico well before I was governor, right? So you had tested these legislative ideas. You had really set a narrative. That made my job much easier, even though it took us 2 efforts to get all 3 bills passed. And then last, elected leaders need to be not intimidated by the NRA and by efforts with some law enforcement folks, and they have free speech and every right to talk about their issues. But when you've got elected leaders, some sheriffs, some law enforcement folks who also put out false information, I think there's some trepidation that if it is somebody in a uniform, that they can't be putting out false information. And I'm not suggesting that that's purposeful, but the groups that they are working with, I think, leverage them in ways that are completely inappropriate. And as a result, elected leaders have to have confidence that that's what's going on, and they can maintain their relationships with their first responders, but they can also set an agenda that protects everybody else. And last, and I know I'm going too long, who else is protected? First responders are protected. And so that really made a difference in our legislature, and it's making a difference in our communities.
Oh, no, I thought that was a great answer. Thank you so much. And you were just talking about sheriffs. What is your message to those who continue to argue that these gun laws that are being passed in New Mexico are unconstitutional? We know that they've been ruled constitutional by courts time and time again. And I know you've even encouraged sheriffs to resign if they refuse to enforce these laws.
Well, you got to stand your ground, right? And again, from the political side, when a sheriff on his or her own time says, "I really disagree, I'm disappointed," but of course, on my professional arm, I will enforce every law. I can respect that and completely am fine with the First Amendment, right? Free speech. But when you have a first responder law enforcement individual who says they are not going to enforce the laws, I've made clear 3 things. 1, you should resign because you can't do your job, and I've been unafraid and unabashed about that. 2, you're creating a liability for your community, and that means that creates liabilities for government in general, including the state, which provides liability protections to local government. And 3, if you're not going to invest in your required public safety agenda, then I'll do it using other first responders. And so governors need to have confidence that they will win these legal arguments. We just won a legal argument against the NRA for COVID-19 stay-at-home instructions and business closures. So, we're on solid legal ground. No governor, no person is suggesting to do something outside, right, of these strong legal grounds. None of these rights are, as you know, I can't think of the right word. I should take another sip of coffee. But all of them have limitations because your personal right can affect the rights and safety of other individuals. And the notion that these rights are unabridged in any way by anyone, including the NRA, are false. And we need to keep pushing that out so that folks are clear that we're on the right side of these issues.
I love unafraid and unabashed. I think those are the qualities of any demanding woman. Let's pivot to the healthcare aspects of this. You were the state secretary of health before you became governor. So drawing on that background, how do you make evidence and science-based decisions when it comes to combating both COVID-19 and gun violence?
The value there, and again, we should be following science and we should be fact-based, right? If you want a successful advocacy campaign, people want to know that you're telling them the truth and that you're addressing problems using evidence-based strategies so that you know that they'll work, right? And again, I want every idea that keeps us safe safer, moves in that direction. But I also need to know that there's some study or body of evidence that shows that that effort really will make a difference. And of course, you all have done a mountain of that, and that really helps departments of health and elected leaders such as myself and other governors around the country. But here's the issue. In a public health dynamic, we are spending, people forget about that in trauma and first responders are at risk and domestic violence is exacerbated and behavioral health, all of these issues. Gun violence, in fact, is a public health emergency and is an epidemic in this state. And if you want to look at ways to solve that, then we have to look at the science and the behavior aspects about gun violence. And just this, right, as states, including this one, move to protect the general public from a brand new enemy, this invisible, deadly virus, what happened in the first few weeks of closing down our states by making sure that we were keeping people distanced and isolated from one another? Gun sales went up. So it really is tied to fear and a sense that government is controlling our actions. Government should just provide evidence-based solutions that create fair protections and be based in sound policymaking, facts to back it up. But why would that be the reaction for folks? Before even food purchases early on, people were rushing to buy firearms. So we need to understand that response and find ways to deal with people's earnest fear. And we don't want folks like the NRA building on that fear by giving them false facts and a false agenda. So departments of health need to be studying that and need real evidence-based solutions to help us navigate this in this country so that we can resolve this epidemic.
You were just talking about the spike in gun sales that we've seen. And during those same months, the Trump administration advised states and local officials that they should deem gun stores as being essential, essentially suggesting that gun dealers are as important as law enforcement, medical professionals, grocery store workers. You, however, did not heed this advice. So can you tell us why you saw this differently than the White House?
Well, look, I separated businesses based on, essential for, right? You got to be able to turn your lights on. You've got to be able to get fuel for your vehicle. You have to be able to get to your medical appointments. And you absolutely need to be able to get personal items and food. So we were very clear about those are essential items, and a gun store, perfectly legal and appropriate in all states. You can still get gun sales on the internet. And that's an area that I always worry about, not just for gun sales, but a number of areas. But in fact, you could do that. So I wasn't limiting your ability, your right to purchase. I was just making sure that retailers that didn't fit in one of those categories, we closed them. And in fact, the NRA challenged us and we won in court, because we were very clear about how we defined essential services, and that it meant that you're keeping a roof over your head, being able to solve your problems, got a roof leak, got to have hardware stores open. If it met those daily requirements, for the life and safety of human beings and families, you were essential. If it didn't, you were not. You were then retail. And then we opened them up slowly, but all in the same way. And I think that where states made a mistake is not believing that you want to limit movement by individuals. If you're trying to socially isolate humans, then it has to be very narrowly tailored. And frankly, we flattened our curve early. We lowered our peaks. We were the first state to be able to test asymptomatic populations. And yet we've got some real challenges, nursing homes, federal detention centers, and Native American communities who don't have access to running water and electricity, so they have to travel. So they were at a higher risk, and a federal government that never provided those necessary basic services to them. And again, look what happened. So I feel very good about those decisions. And I think that states that didn't do the right tailoring, didn't do the right messaging, and may in fact have worried about the politics. And I didn't make any decisions about COVID based on politics.
Well, I love hearing about how you're taking on the NRA and winning. It's making my day. Something we're seeing in New Mexico and frankly across the country are these armed protests. And we know they're fueled by fear mongering and extremism. What is your response to these types of protests?
I'm really working hard to get folks to not create by intimidation, having their voices heard when they're in disagreement, right? That's not a productive public discourse. And I don't want people in large groups, although we have not worked to try to prevent them from getting a permit to be outside. We've encouraged them to wear face masks. In New Mexico, frankly, many people have. I'll give folks real credit for that. But I worry that showing your right to bear a firearm, and New Mexico's a concealed carry state, so I don't even have to see it for you to be able to have it. They really sort of pushed that issue by being in areas that in this state, even though we're part of the West, where guns, because we got large rural areas, we've got incredible, right? Our wildlife here is wonderful, beautiful. I just saw deer walk by here at the governor's residence. It's amazing. And we have people who hunt to put food on the table and protect themselves from cougars and bears and their livestock. And they, frankly, have every right to do that. But when you take those rifles and firearms into a place where that's not what you're doing, it's really intended to intimidate everybody else. And I've worried and been concerned that that's not an effective way to demonstrate your opinion against the decisions of any administration, including ours. Now, I'm going to give New Mexicans, even though they continue to do those protests, a shout out. They've worked hard, frankly, to not attack state police and others that are doing the crowd management and trying to keep everyone safe. They have not rushed to get into a public office or the Capitol. They have been fairly productively managed, and I want to talk about the Mexicans are clear that they need to be cautious about that fear and intimidation are not acceptable here, and shame on the Trump White House, who encourages folks to do exactly that. It's not about discourse about their disagreement. It's about trying to intimidate elected leaders and others to change the course, because now they want to just open up the economy, and we do too. But I need to do that in a fact-based way, making sure that public health data and science is leading our decisions. And so my advice to those other governors is get in front of it to the degree that you can, work hard with your state police and others, and really ask folks in these communities to make sure that they tell folks that they don't want to be intimidated, but recognize that they have a right to disagree. Really disappointing.
In total agreement on that.
Yeah.
Yes, it is really terrifying to see it on display. I want to bring in a question from one of your constituents, Governor. This is a video question from Robin Brule. She's a New Mexico resident who lives in a gun-owning household, and she's also a survivor of gun violence. So let's play her question now.
Governor, New Mexico has a long history of responsible gun ownership. And coming from a family which owns guns, I understand the need to listen to gun owners. And as a survivor of gun violence, whose mother was murdered by a firearm purchased during an unlicensed sale, I understand the need to show lawmakers, like yourself, how gun owners do support common sense laws. What's your advice to other elected officials, not just here in New Mexico, about support for gun safety? How do you engage with gun owners?
Robin, first of all, is not just your normal everyday constituent. Robin Brule is an incredible community leader in any number of ways. And it does take courage to talk about your personal tragedies. And I just want to thank her. She has shared that story in a number of places and ways in New Mexico. And I am grateful for her leadership and her courage. But I have to say that really does make a difference. When you have responsible gun owners who are willing to share their own stories or their own strategies, and I have one of my own. So I have family that are landowners and ranchers, and my fiance is a hunter and comes from a family that ranched. So having rifles and guns was part of a necessary aspect of their daily jobs and daily lives. And in our relationship, instead of talking to them about gun safety, I made my fiance buy everyone in his family gun lockers. So we gave them gifts. And don't preach, but I want to understand, how can I make it easy for you to do public safety, to do your job and work, to get effective gun safety training, to protect others? We don't want your gun stolen. What can I be doing that recognizes those issues and understands them to a much higher degree? When you start from that perspective, instead of, I have all of these gun violence and gun safety pieces of legislation, can I explain them to you? I think it does change the conversation. I need folks who are responsible gun owners to make sure that I understand those issues and that we aren't going to create an environment where unnecessarily their rights get abridged in any way. And I think that is a place where this has become such a divisive issue that you have to pick sides. And what we're working to do in our state, because you want effective enforcement and we want to reduce domestic violence, we want to deal with the behavioral health issues. Suicide isn't just about gun violence. Suicide is about any number of issues, and you have to address them all. And what Robin points out is that there's an opportunity to do that in a much more comprehensive, holistic way. And that's my advice to other elected leaders. Make sure that you do that and have that as part of your conversation. Or you're going to be maybe too narrow or too wide in your response, and that's going to create frustration with your partners.
That's exactly right. This is simply about restoring the responsibilities that go along with gun rights. So thank you for that, Governor. Thank you, Robin, for your question. I'd like to pivot now to the 2020 elections and ask you, what do you think Vice President Biden and down ticket candidates should be talking about when they're talking about gun safety on the campaign trail?
That's a hard question, because I will tell you what's going to be on the minds of everyone is now going to be COVID and getting the economy back together. And your point is really valid, which is we can't let fall by the wayside that we have a real opportunity. Frankly, you need federal leadership to really deal with both studying gun violence as an epidemic, putting together a framework for much better behavioral health, to really stopping the non-fact-based work by groups like the NRA, because you create at the White House, right, a standard, productive, supportive. And look, Vice President Biden, right, when there was an effort and it was successful at banning assault weapons and not making sure that we don't militarize our law enforcement. Well, these are areas that have broad-based support in this country. And we've got the opportunity to have someone who was a voting member of the Senate, who understands gun violence as an epidemic, to talk about those experiences and to talk about what worked in that context and to bring that to the forefront of the 2020 election. And all the down ballot candidates need to make sure that they're talking about that as well. And last, talk about the impacts we're having in states that have closed the background check loopholes and the gun show loopholes, and making sure that extreme risk protection orders, when you have students in schools who are anxious to go back to school after COVID, who are going to have to practice all new, right, safety, public health safety efforts. That's a great space to talk about. It's time to make sure that all public health safety efforts and aspects are being addressed in schools. And students are afraid. And making sure that we're doing everything that we can to minimize that fear and to make sure that we don't lose one more student at a mass shooting, or one more educator, one more family member. These tragedies are preventable. So we should be talking about them in the 2020 election, because we need federal leadership to make sure that every state has an opportunity to once and for all prevent the kind of violence that it's occurring and playing out in all of our communities every day.
Thank you for that. And you're exactly right. Gun safety is a winning issue. I want to talk with you about a question we have on social media from Instagram. It's a question about how states with stay-at-home orders can protect victims of domestic violence. What do you think governors and state legislatures can do about that right now?
Well, I think it's a real clear issue about we have weak systems, and I am clear that in New Mexico we need to do more. And I'm going to pivot just a little. It's not just domestic violence. Back to the behavioral health issues in general. If you're isolating families, we know that there is risk, right? The behavioral health aspects of all of this, and then you introduce a firearm, just enhance those risks. And in New Mexico, we lost an 11-year-old to suicide by a firearm that I think absolutely has is related to being isolated, because we know that having access to your peers makes a difference. And we know in domestic violence, that separation creates a safety factor. We know that we can go in the house because we're involved more directly in removing a firearm through, utilizing the right due process vehicles to do that, keeps those families safer. And in this response, a lot of those typical programs aren't accessible in the same way. And so the lesson really here is this legislature should expect, even with the economic collapse across the country and certainly the economic challenges in the state, we need more supports, and we need more what I'm going to call sort of check-ins, and not quite enforcement, but also enforcement components, and we need them also in the courts. We need a system where we're checking on the safety and well-being of families, and we aren't doing that as robustly as we need to, and it is a clear issue. And again, those behavioral health and those social strategies that must be in place in addition to common sense, smart gun safety laws have to be working in concert together. And I think this is a demonstration where you have another risk factor added. It's been more difficult than it ought to be. And I'm actually really concerned about it in this state and around the country. And we're going to ask for legislative support for different investments and different strategies so that we can do a better job protecting our families.
Governor, we have covered so much during this discussion. I want to end with one last thing. What message do you have for my fellow Moms Demand Action volunteers and Students Demand Action volunteers who fight tirelessly for gun safety?
Keep doing it. I'm going to pivot again. My career, everybody finds an issue that you can make a difference. It literally saves the lives of the people that you love and the communities that you care about. That drives all of us. And I think moms in particular, who really do have an emotional, protective, it's scientifically based about our maternal instincts. I had my maternal instinct, in addition to my own family, play itself out in protecting nursing home residents. And early in my career, it caused me to actually go undercover as a resident to expose, and again, a national industry that had an incredible lobby, and we were not doing nearly enough to protect residents. And we did a great job in New Mexico. And then things shifted. Nobody paid attention. And after all that advocacy and all of that work, and having the only state in the nation with laws that allow us to do undercover care evaluations, right? I find myself in and I'm so lucky to be the governor of the best state in the country, that for the last decade, people didn't pay attention, right? They thought they solved those problems. We could take a break, relax, walk away. And what do you think has happened? There's not enough staff. Look what's happening in COVID. We can't contain the infections. People really are at risk. And families, I think, are really bewildered and hurt and angry that there isn't more being done, or that there weren't more standards and safety. So you have to be tireless. If you care about these issues and it really is a matter of life or death, our advocacy work and our educational work will never be done. And we need more people joining this effort, because the more people who engage, the more likely it is that we create a national framework that's more consistent than it is today, with federal leadership about making sure that the United States isn't in the worst position in terms of gun violence in the world, and becomes a worldwide leader for public health and public safety. And so I need you. So I want you to all continue your efforts, but we need more people who are joining us to make sure that we get that done in short order. And the 2020 election cycle is a perfect opportunity to do that.
That's great advice. And going undercover to root out corruption is certainly something only a demanding woman would do. So thank you so much, Governor. Thank you for joining us today. We could not do this without your leadership in New Mexico and across the country. We're so grateful to have you in our corner.
I feel the same way about you. I feel a little embarrassed about taking that compliment. I can't do it. No elected leader can make the kind of productive changes that are important to their communities and states without the folks on the ground who, as you said, tirelessly are working to make a difference. So right back at you. Thank you for today. Thank you for your work. And let's go win it all everywhere we can.
Let's do it. Thank you, Governor.
Let's do it.
Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. You too. Bye-bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Yes, you too. Thanks to everyone who joined us today on Twitter and Facebook. We will be back with Representative Val Demings on Friday, May 29th at noon Eastern. And if you'd like to get involved with Everytown, Moms Demand Action, and Students Demand Action, simply text the word READY to 64433. And as always, stay safe, and remember, nothing is more productive, persuasive, or powerful than a demanding woman.